Okay, rotors come in two classifications: 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch. There is a 1/2 inch, there is a 1/4 inch bit. Okay, that is the diameter of the shank, so that is a 1/2 inch rotor, that's a 1/4 inch rotor. So that will determine which rotor you're going to use as you select the bit you want, and then the rotor to drive it. All right, so you can see there are two very similar profiles, just different dimensions. So you have to use your imagination to figure out what profile you want to have and which one you want to, and how you want to use it. So you can get many different profiles out of one particular bit. So if you were to set that one just to that edge, you would just have a perfectly good cove. If you go deeper, then you get a cove with a shoulder. So different things for different uses. So we got the 1/4 inch and the 1/2 inch. The 1/4 inch rotor has, this is what you call a laminate trimmer, but made for light duty work. Okay. And always remember, most rotors are variable speed. You can see this one here has a variable speed. This one does not. Small rotors or laminate trimmers run at one speed because the bits are small. But when you get into bigger bits like this one here, you want to slow down the speed. Okay, so when you're putting a rotor bit in, you want to put it in all the way and back it off just a little bit. Okay, and typically that'll get you what you need for depth, or the rotor will be able to adjust it that far. So this particular rotor uses 2 wrenches, one to hold the spindle and one for the nut, and you want to tighten those up. And a rotor you want to make sure are reasonably tight. Okay, like so. Okay, so that way you've got your rotor bit tight. You do never want your rotor to come out. So I'm feeling around on the inside of this plastic sleeve to find the groove. Okay, I found the groove right there. You want to make sure you line up the grooves when you put this thing back together. And it's just a slide adjust. So you slide the rotor, and then you can visually see over top of the base how deep you want to go. So if I just wanted a round corner, I would want to line up that base with the top shoulders of that bit, and then I would just have a small round over. Okay, always use a tester when you are using a rotor. Run your cut, make sure it's the right depth before you do anything. So this particular rotor made to run with one hand. You can run with one hand, and as simple as that. So, and removing the bit, you would want to obviously loosen it first. And if you ever find where the rotor bit is stuck and you can't get it out, what you want to do is take a block of wood and hit it that way, sideways. Don't beat on it, don't get pliers, just take a block of wood and smack it that way, and that will loosen it up. What happens is the collar that's inside of there is cut, has relief cuts in it. So when you tighten that nut, it compresses that and it gets stuck on there. So what happens is by hitting it on a block of wood, it levers it and opens up those grooves, and then the bit will slide out. So there's another look at another different type of locking mechanism, that how it's got cuts in it, it compresses, holds that bit, and then that sideways motion opens them up. Okay, so that is your 1/4 inch rotor. Very simple. Now the 1/2 inch one has many more adjustments on it, and this is where most people get very confused, because it is a plunge rotor, and it has many stops and so on it. So on that particular rotor, we have many different stops. Here is the plunging lock. So that locks it. It can't move up or down. So that's on that side. So you can operate that with your left hand. You have the trigger over here on your right. One thing you always want to make sure of is, before you start playing with any rotor, before you plug it in, is make sure that it is turned off. It is very easy to accidentally turn it on or off, and they plug it in, and if it was on, you're in for a big surprise. Okay, so there is your lock on the back side there. Now I'm in the unlock position. You can see that I can plunge. You can see that I'm only allowed to plunge so far because I have a depth stop here. We have 3 depth stops on this particular router, and that is set and can be adjusted into 3 different depth stops or no depth stop at all. Okay, so those are all adjustable so that you can do 3 different setups with 1 plunge. Okay, and then as you can see, this we can adjust as well, and it has a push button on it. We can do a quick adjust just by pushing it, or we can get that out of the way. So okay, we can do that up and down. Now you can see this particular one, this is allowing how far we come up with our, see, I'm going to lock the position so it's easier to spin. Okay, that way I haven't got the springs pushing up against it, so it's easier to undo, and then we can plunge up higher. That way your bit, if you have a bit in there, can come up into the base of the rotor, and it's not hanging below. So you can have that extra safety feature where you can plunge down to your stop, lock the rotor, perform the cut, release it, have it pop up, and your bit is up and out of the way. So that's nice about the plunge rotor. Now with this particular one, we have a much larger base hole than these ones. Okay, that is so when you get into some big cutters that this can come out. Now this particular rotor has 2 screws holding it. You loosen one, take one out all. Okay, with rotors, a bit must be guided in one of 3 ways. One, to perform any cut, it's got to be guided. So number 1, you've got to have a bearing on your bit, and that bit bearing will guide along a edge, so you have a straight cut. So whatever the surface is, it will follow it. So if you got a bumpy surface, you will have a bumpy edge. This will not straighten it. Okay, and another way to run a rotor is with a fence. You can put a fence into a rotor and use that fence to guide your rotor, like so. That will guide your rotor, and once again, this may straighten out a few surfaces depending on how lumpy or bumpy your straight edge is, but the rotor will follow that as well. Another way to do that is what they call a template guide, and this goes into the base of the rotor like so. Fits into the rotor like that. Screw on the base, ring, and that only needs to be finger tight. You do not need to tighten it up any more than that. Note how that fits in nice and flush. So if you were using a straight cutter, for example, that becomes your guide. So you can guide it that way. And also you can put a fence against the base of the rotor. So I guess that's 4 ways, not 3. So different ways to guide your rotor, but they have to have a guide one way or another. Freehanding a rotor is not an option.